The rain came down like punishment from the heavens, soaking me until every layer of clothing clung to my skin. The road stretched endlessly on both sides, slick and shining under the weak glow of scattered streetlights. His taillights were the only thing visible at first, bright red dots retreating into the dark, carrying with them the last shred of warmth I thought I had left. You need a lesson. Those words replayed like a broken record in my mind, louder than the storm itself. A lesson. That was always his favorite phrase, wasn't it? A justification for every cruelty, every manipulation, every twisted way of reminding me that he had the power, not me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there on the side of that lonely highway, water dripping from my hair into my eyes, and let the reality of the moment sink in. I had been abandoned 37 miles from home. No phone. No umbrella. No mercy, and strangely enough, no fear. His lessons began almost innocently. At first, they were coded in charm, packaged as corrections or improvements. When I made a decision he didn't agree with, he would chuckle, kiss my forehead, and say, "You'll learn, love." Back then, I mistook it for guidance, for a sign that he wanted to protect me. But guidance slowly curdled into domination. When I contradicted him in public, even about something trivial, he would go silent for days. When I wanted to spend time with friends he disapproved of, my car keys would mysteriously disappear. And whenever I questioned his authority, he would tilt his head, smile coldly, and say, "Careful. You need to learn your place." I should have seen it then. But love makes fools of us all, doesn't it? We want to believe the fairy tale so badly that we'll excuse the monster living inside it. Tonight, though, there were no excuses left. Abandoning me in the storm wasn't guidance. It wasn't correction. It wasn't even discipline. It was cruelty, pure and unfiltered. And cruelty has a way of clarifying things. At first, I thought the road had abandoned me too. Cars flashed by in the distance but none slowed. Who would stop for a drenched silhouette on the shoulder of a highway at midnight? Then I saw it. Headlights, steady and deliberate, cutting through the sheets of rain. The vehicle was large, its presence heavy, purposeful. It slowed as it approached me, pulling to a stop just a few feet away. My heart thudded in my chest. For a split second, I thought he had come back, smug and satisfied, ready to see me broken. But no, the shape of the vehicle was wrong. Too big. Too dark. The driver's door opened, and a figure stepped out. Broad shoulders. Calm movements. Eyes scanning the surroundings before they landed on me. He didn't rush, didn't panic. He simply stood there, like he had been expecting this moment all along. "Come," he said, voice steady, carrying easily over the roar of the storm. I didn't hesitate. My body moved before my mind caught up. My feet splashed through the puddles as I crossed the short distance, and when he opened the passenger door, I climbed in without a word. Inside, the warmth of the truck wrapped around me instantly. The air smelled faintly of leather and rain-soaked earth. The world outside was chaos, but here, inside this vehicle, everything felt controlled. Safe. I turned my head toward him. Droplets still sliding down my cheeks. He kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. No questions. No judgment. Just presence. For the first time that night, I smiled. We drove in silence at first, the storm outside our only soundtrack. I pressed my forehead lightly against the cool glass, watching the rain streak sideways across the window, and let my thoughts spiral. He thought this would break me. He thought I'd be crawling back by morning, desperate for forgiveness, begging him to end the silent treatment that would follow. He thought cruelty was strength, but sitting in that truck, warmth seeping back into my bones, I realized something profound. This wasn't the lesson he wanted to give me. This was the lesson life had just given him, though he didn't know it yet. His last mistake wasn't leaving me in the storm, his last mistake was underestimating me. The drive stretched on, and with it came memories I had tried so hard to bury. The first year of marriage had been perfect, or at least, that's how it looked to everyone else. Expensive dinners, exotic vacations, a picture-perfect home. People would look at me and whisper how lucky I was, how I had found someone strong. Successful, protective, they never saw what happened when the doors closed. The criticism began subtly: how I dressed, how I spoke, the friends I kept. Every time I resisted, there was a consequence. Sometimes it was silence. Sometimes it was anger. Sometimes it was the slow withdrawal of affection, until I found myself apologizing for things I hadn't done just to win back the scraps of love he dangled like bait, and I convinced myself that was normal. That was marriage. That was love, but love doesn't leave you stranded in the rain. The figure driving beside me finally spoke, voice low and deliberate: "You don't have to explain." My head turned sharply, but he wasn't looking at me. His eyes remained fixed on the road, hands steady, jaw tight. He didn't need to say more. Somehow, in those few words, he had acknowledged everything without me having to voice it. I leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. The tension in my body eased, but the storm inside my chest only grew. He thought he had ended me, but what he had really done was free me. As the truck pushed through the storm, an idea took root in my mind. Not just a thought, but a certainty, as if the rain itself had washed away all hesitation. I wasn't going back to him. I wasn't going to apologize. I wasn't going to let this be another scar hidden beneath my skin. No. This time, the lesson would be his, and it would be one he'd never forget. When the truck finally turned off the highway and into familiar streets, the storm had softened to a steady drizzle. My pulse quickened as I recognized the route, the looming outline of the house where my life had been caged for years. The vehicle slowed, and I felt the driver glance at me, waiting for direction. I didn't speak at first. I just stared at the house through the misted window, 1,000 memories clawing at me, some good, most suffocating. Finally, I whispered, "Not yet." He nodded once, as though he had already known what I would say. That night, lying awake in a quiet, unfamiliar room, I stared at the ceiling and let the storm in my chest rage. Every lesson, every insult, every act of control replayed in my mind like a montage of chains snapping one by one. He thought leaving me would make me smaller, but in reality, he had unleashed something in me he could never contain again, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The storm outside had ended, but inside me, it had only just begun. I woke up to silence the next morning, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe but suffocates. My body was still heavy from exhaustion, but my mind was alive, racing with thoughts I couldn't contain. The memory of being left on that highway clung to me like the dampness still lingering in my hair. For years, I had carried every wound he inflicted as if it were my fault, my burden to hide. But this time? No. Something inside me had shifted permanently. By the time I returned to the house, the mask was already back on his face. He greeted me at the door with a smirk, like nothing had happened, like abandoning me 37 miles from home in the middle of a storm was no different than forgetting to take out the trash. He leaned casually against the frame, his tone light, mocking. "See? You made it back. Stronger already." In the past, I would have lowered my eyes, swallowed the hurt, forced myself to smile. I would have told myself this was marriage, this was love, this was the price of security. But not today. Today, I let the silence hang between us, meeting his gaze without a word. My eyes didn't flinch. My shoulders didn't bow. And for the first time, I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in his expression. It was quick, almost invisible, but I caught it. Power had shifted, even if he didn't realize it yet. The next few days were a performance, one we both knew too well. He strutted around the house like a king, issuing orders, making demands, expecting me to move in rhythm with his whims. To him, the storm was forgotten, just another lesson that would fade into the endless cycle of control and forgiveness. But for me, every interaction was different. I listened more closely. I watched more carefully. I noticed things I had overlooked before: the way his phone was always turned face down, the late-night messages he claimed were business, the sudden business trips that didn't add up. I began to see the cracks in the mask he wore so proudly. And once you see the cracks, you can't unsee them. It was late one night when I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection under the harsh white light. For years, I had barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Eyes dulled, mouth tight, posture slumped. A woman trained to shrink, to please, to obey. but that night, I saw something new. A spark. A defiance that hadn't been there before. I touched the glass, fingertips brushing against the reflection of my own eyes, and whispered, "No more." It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was a promise. Revenge doesn't happen in grand gestures, not at first. It begins in small, quiet ways, tiny rebellions that seem insignificant but carry the weight of a revolution. The first thing I did was simple. I stopped apologizing. Whenever he tried to bait me with sharp words, I didn't respond. When he waited for me to lower my head in shame, I met his eyes and said nothing. My silence unnerved him more than any argument ever had. Then I began to test boundaries. I left the house without telling him. I bought things he would have deemed unnecessary. I stayed on the phone with people he didn't approve of. Small acts, but each one was a crack in the foundation of control he had built so carefully, and with each act, I felt stronger. I wasn't alone in this. The figure who had pulled me out of the storm, my quiet rescuer, was still there, always in the background, watching, waiting. He never asked questions, never pushed, but I could feel his presence like a shadow that refused to leave. Sometimes, I would catch his eyes lingering on me a moment too long. As though he saw the war I was fighting inside myself. Sometimes, when our paths crossed, his words were simple but grounding, "You're not as weak as he thinks." Those words became a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't crazy for feeling what I felt, that the strength I was rediscovering was real, not imagined. It didn't take long for the tension to rise. One evening, he came home later than usual, reeking of perfume that wasn't mine, his shirt wrinkled in ways that told their own story. He tossed his keys on the counter, poured himself a drink, and smiled like nothing had happened. In the past, I would have confronted him. I would have cried, shouted, demanded answers. And he would have turned it back on me, twisted the truth until I was apologizing for even suspecting him. But not this time. This time, I simply watched. Calm. Silent. Letting him see the steadiness in my eyes that he couldn't shake. And for the first time, it was him who grew uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, clearing his throat, avoiding my gaze. The power was shifting, and he felt it. Over the following weeks, his temper grew sharper. He didn't like silence, didn't like resistance that wasn't loud and easy to crush. He wanted tears, shouting, chaos, things he could twist and manipulate. But when all he got was quiet defiance, it unsettled him in ways he couldn't control. He began snapping over small things, a glass left on the counter, a meal not cooked the way he liked, the fact that I was humming to myself one afternoon. The mask of charm that he wore so effortlessly in public began to slip more often in private, revealing the cracks underneath, and I watched it all, calm, patient, calculating. It was no surprise when the betrayal surfaced. I had suspected it long before, the late nights, the sudden trips, the lingering scent of someone else. But suspicion turned into certainty one afternoon when I found the evidence tucked carelessly into the pocket of his jacket, a hotel receipt. 2 glasses of wine, a room for 2. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. I felt clarity. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about a man who thought he could live without consequences. A man who believed control made him untouchable, and that was when the plan truly began to take shape. Revenge wasn't going to be loud or violent. It wasn't going to be a single moment of triumph. It was going to be slow, deliberate, undeniable. I would dismantle him piece by piece, not with screams, but with silence, not with chaos, but with precision. He had taught me many lessons over the years. Now it was my turn to teach him the only lesson that mattered, what it felt like to lose control. The first move was simple: information. I began observing more closely his routines, his contacts, his weaknesses. I noticed how he left his laptop open when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I noticed the names that came up repeatedly in his phone, the numbers saved under vague initials. I didn't act yet. I simply collected, quietly, carefully, like a hunter studying prey. Every detail became a weapon I stored away for later, and while I gathered, I smiled. I played the part of the obedient partner when needed, all while knowing the truth. The war had already begun, and he didn't even realize it. The distance between us grew, though he tried desperately to pretend otherwise. He invited me to dinners, flashed his charm in front of friends, wrapped an arm around me in public like nothing was wrong. But behind closed doors, the cracks were impossible to ignore. I no longer laughed at his jokes, I no longer sought his approval, I no longer fed the ego that thrived on my submission. And the more I withdrew, the more he chased, frustrated and confused. He couldn't understand how the strings he had pulled so easily for years suddenly refused to move. Through it all, the quiet presence of my rescuer remained. Always nearby, always watchful. Our conversations were few, our words sparse, but there was an understanding between us that didn't need explanation. He had seen me at my lowest, pulled me out of the storm, and in doing so, had ignited something I thought I had lost forever, the belief that I wasn't powerless. One evening, as he stood silently by, his eyes met mine for a moment longer than usual. No words were exchanged, but I felt it, the acknowledgement of the path I had chosen, the promise of silent support if I needed it, and in that moment, I knew, I wasn't alone in this. The turning point came on a night like any other. He returned home, drunk, arrogant, muttering about deals and meetings that I knew were lies. He dropped his jacket carelessly on the floor, demanded dinner, and collapsed onto the couch with his phone clutched tightly in his hand. I watched from the doorway, calm, steady. And then, for the first time in years, I laughed. Softly, but loud enough for him to hear. He looked up, startled, confusion flickering across his face. "What's so funny?" he demanded. I smiled, tilting my head. "You'll find out." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving him staring after me, unsettled in a way I had never seen before. It was the beginning of the end. Revenge doesn't begin with fire, it begins with patience. The night I laughed in his face was the first time I truly felt in control. The expression he wore, confusion, irritation, maybe even a flicker of fear, was priceless. For years, I had been predictable, easy to manage. Now, I had become a mystery, and mysteries terrified him. The days that followed were quiet. But beneath the surface, I was working. Watching. Listening. Collecting. He had always been careless, too arrogant to imagine anyone could outsmart him. He left his phone lying around sometimes, not for long, but long enough. He used the same password for everything, convinced of his own brilliance. He bragged when he drank too much, forgetting how sharp my ears had become. Piece by piece, I gathered receipts, messages, photos. The fragments of a double life he thought he could hide. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry. I didn't let him know I knew. Instead, I smiled when he told lies. I kissed him on the cheek when he reeked of someone else's perfume. I played the role of the dutiful partner so flawlessly that he never suspected, all while building the weapon that would end him. It didn't take long for the pressure to show. My silence unnerved him more than any argument. He wanted drama, tears, the chaos he could twist to his advantage. Instead, he was met with calm stares, quiet smiles, and an absence of reaction that left him off balance. One evening, he slammed his fist against the table, frustrated. "What's wrong with you? Why don't you say anything?" I looked at him evenly. Why would I? The simplicity of the answer threw him more than any shouting ever could. His control was slipping, and he knew it. Through it all, the quiet presence of my rescuer never wavered. Always nearby, always steady, a reminder that I wasn't fighting alone. There were moments when our eyes met and lingered longer than they should have. Moments when silence said more than words ever could. He didn't ask for details, didn't push, but I could feel the promise in his gaze. If I fell, he would catch me. It gave me strength to keep going. The turning point came when I found what I'd been waiting for, undeniable evidence. One night, after he stumbled to bed, I slipped into the study where his laptop sat glowing faintly. He had left it open, arrogant as always. I copied everything, emails, photos, messages, onto a small drive I had hidden away for weeks. Each file was a nail in his coffin, each message, a thread in the rope tightening around his neck. I didn't need to exaggerate. I didn't need to invent. His own actions were enough to destroy him. Revenge, I learned, isn't one grand strike. It's death by 1,000 cuts. I started small. Misplacing things he needed. Leaving subtle hints that I knew more than I should. Smiling at the wrong moments. Whispering things just loud enough for him to hear when I thought he was half asleep. It was delicious, watching him unravel. He grew paranoid, snapping more often, questioning me about things I hadn't done. Who were you talking to? Why are you smiling? What do you know? I would tilt my head, feign innocence, and say softly, nothing. Why do you look so nervous? And every time, his jaw tightened, his hands clenched, his composure cracked. Of course, in public, he still tried to play the charming husband. He draped his arm around me at dinners, boasted about our perfect life, flashed that smile that fooled everyone, but behind closed doors, he couldn't hide the tension anymore. His hands shook when he poured his drinks. His eyes darted when I caught him watching me. The cracks in the mask were widening, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't patch them fast enough, and I watched it all with quiet satisfaction. The real slip came one night when he returned home drunk and careless. He dropped his phone on the counter without locking it. While he muttered to himself in the other room, I picked it up. What I saw confirmed everything I already knew: messages filled with lies, photos that told stories he could never explain, hotel bookings that exposed his double life. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been, careful not to disturb a thing. When he staggered back into the kitchen, I smiled sweetly and handed him a glass of water. Long night? I asked softly. He froze, studying my face, searching for a clue that I knew. But I gave him nothing. Just a smile, and in that silence, he began to fear me. Power is a strange thing. For years, I thought he held all of it. But as I sat there, calm and composed, while he fumbled and lied, I realized the truth: power belongs to the one who needs nothing. He needed my obedience. My silence. My submission. Without it, he was nothing but a man scrambling to maintain control he no longer had, and I needed nothing from him anymore. That was true power. The evidence I gathered was enough to ruin him, personally, professionally, socially. But I wasn't rushing. No. That would be too easy. Too merciful. Instead, I began weaving a web. Subtle, invisible, but inescapable. I dropped hints to people who mattered: friends, colleagues, anyone who could spread whispers when the time came. I planted seeds of doubt in conversations, always careful, always calculated. By the time the truth surfaced, no one would be surprised. They would only nod and say, I always suspected. One evening, as I sat across from him at dinner, I realized something remarkable. I wasn't afraid anymore. He could slam his fist, raise his voice, even threaten, but it no longer reached me. His power over me had dissolved, leaving him exposed, weak, and desperate. I cut into my food, calm and steady, while he ranted about work, about stress, about how ungrateful everyone was. His words washed over me like meaningless noise, and in that moment, I smiled, not at him, but at myself, because I knew the truth. The trap was already set, and soon, he would walk right into it. The house felt different now. It wasn't my cage anymore, it was his. Every creak in the floorboards, every silence that stretched too long, every smile I gave unsettled him. The man who had once thrived on control now lived in quiet terror of what he couldn't name, and I savored every second. At first, it was subtle. He would glance over his shoulder when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd linger in doorways, watching me too long, waiting for me to slip. His phone never left his hand anymore, clenched like a lifeline he couldn't afford to drop. Then it grew worse. He began asking strange questions. Who called just now? Why were you smiling at the grocery store clerk? Where were you when I couldn't reach you? I answered each one calmly, evenly, always leaving just enough space for doubt. Sometimes I answered with another question. Sometimes with silence. It drove him mad. He wanted certainty, submission, tears. Instead, I gave him ambiguity, calmness, control. The more unshaken I was, the more unsteady he became. One evening, he burst into the bedroom holding his phone. His face was pale, his hands trembling. Did you go through my messages? He demanded. I looked up from my book, my expression calm. Why would I? His eyes searched mine, desperate, frantic. Don't lie to me. I tilted my head. Why? Is there something to find? The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. He dropped his gaze first, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. That was when I knew he was cracking. In public, he still tried to maintain the mask. At dinners, he flashed his practiced smile, told his rehearsed stories, wrapped an arm around me like he owned me, but people noticed. They noticed the tension in his laugh, the stiffness in his posture, the way my calmness contrasted so sharply with his forced charm. Whispers began. Quiet, subtle, but there. Something's different with them. He doesn't look the same. She seems stronger. The seeds I had planted were starting to bloom. My rescuer remained a quiet presence in the background, steady as ever. Our exchanges were still few, but the weight of them grew heavier with each passing day. One afternoon, when our paths crossed, his words were soft but firm. He's slipping. I nodded. I know. And for the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not just protection, but admiration. Revenge isn't only about survival. It's about reclaiming power. And the first bold move was simple. I began to vanish, not completely, not enough to be obvious. Just long enough to unsettle him. I'd leave without explanation, return without answers. I'd spend hours away, my phone conveniently dying, my stories vague. He hated it. Where were you? He demanded one night, his voice sharp, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. I smiled, slipping off my coat. Out. With who? I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. Why does it matter? His jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack, and I walked past him, calm, unshaken, leaving him drowning in his own paranoia. The stronger I became, the weaker he grew. His temper flared over nothing, burnt toast, misplaced keys, and neighbor's dog barking too loudly. He snapped at people in public, lost his charm in meetings, drank more heavily at night. He wasn't the man he used to be. He was slipping, unraveling, collapsing under the weight of his own lies and fears, and I was the one holding the strings. The evidence I had collected sat safely hidden, each piece of proof like a loaded weapon waiting for its moment. But I didn't unleash it yet. No. Timing was everything. Instead, I began to use it in small ways. A comment here, a suggestion there, always subtle, always quiet. I heard you were in that part of town last week, I'd say casually, watching his face pale. Strange, someone mentioned they saw you at that hotel. I'd murmur, eyes steady, voice soft. I never accused. I never shouted. I simply hinted, and every time, he broke a little more. I could hear him pacing at night, his footsteps restless in the hallways, his whispers sharp into the phone. Sometimes he'd sit at the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, his breathing uneven. Once, I opened my eyes to find him watching me, his gaze filled with something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Suspicion? Hatred? I smiled softly, rolled over, and drifted back to sleep. Let him wonder, let him drown. The moment came at a dinner party. Surrounded by colleagues, friends, people who admired him, he began one of his usual stories, boasting, charming, the perfect act, but halfway through, he stumbled. His words faltered. His laugh came out too sharp, too forced. He caught me watching him from across the table, my calm eyes locked on his trembling hands, and he cracked. His voice rose louder than it should have. His smile vanished too quickly. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, whispers swirling as he tried to recover, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped, and everyone had seen it. That night, he didn't speak a word on the drive home. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with something dangerous. When we arrived, he slammed the door, stormed inside, and poured himself drink after drink. I followed slowly. Calmly, my footsteps deliberate. He turned on me suddenly, glass shattering in his hand. What are you doing to me? I tilted my head, my voice quiet. Nothing. You're doing it to yourself. His face twisted with rage and fear, but he had no words. He stormed past me, retreating into the shadows of his own unraveling. That was the night I knew the balance had fully shifted. He was no longer the man who had once towered over me. He was a shell, paranoid, unstable, consumed by fear of things he couldn't control, and I was untouchable. The evidence was still mine to use, the whispers still spreading, the web still tightening. But I no longer needed the proof to know I had won. I had taken back the power he stole. I had turned the cage into his prison, and I wasn't finished yet. Control is an illusion. For years, he believed he had it, and for years, I let him. But now the illusion was mine, and he couldn't see the strings tightening around his neck. I had all the proof I needed. I had the whispers blooming like wildfire in the background. I had patience sharpened into a weapon. All that remained was timing. The mornings became my favorite part of the day. He'd sit at the table, sipping his coffee with restless hands, while I moved calmly around the kitchen. He used to bark orders, demand attention, correct me over the smallest details. Now, he sat silent, eyes darting, waiting for me to speak, and I rarely did. The silence unsettled him more than any words could. He wanted to know what I knew. He wanted me to crack, to accuse, to give him something he could fight. But I gave him nothing, just calmness. Just patience. And it terrified him. It started small. A friend over tea. A colleague during a casual chat. A neighbor in passing. I'd been so worried about him lately, I'd say softly, my eyes downcast. He's been under so much pressure. I never accused. I never gossiped. I simply planted seeds of concern, hints that something wasn't right. People are eager to connect dots when given pieces. They love a mystery, and soon enough, the whisper spread. He doesn't look well. Did you hear about his late nights? She seemed so calm while he looked so frayed. The world was starting to turn its eyes on him, not me. The first piece of evidence I released wasn't explosive, it was subtle, just enough to spark doubt. An anonymous envelope slipped into the hands of someone who mattered. A printout of a single hotel receipt. Nothing more. It spread like fire. He had explanations, of course. He always did. But his voice was too sharp, his words too defensive. And people don't believe explanations when they've already begun to doubt. The whispers grew louder. At work, he struggled to maintain his charm. Colleagues avoided his gaze, conversations quieted when he entered the room. He'd return home furious, slamming doors, muttering about betrayal, about people turning against him. I'd sit calmly, sipping my tea. Strange, I'd murmur, you've always been so respected. The way his hands shook told me everything. Through it all, the silent shadow remained close. He never asked what I was doing, never interfered, but his eyes told me he knew. One evening, as the storm raged outside again, we stood in the same doorway where he had once left me stranded. This time, I wasn't broken, I was unshaken. You're not afraid anymore, he said softly. I met his gaze, steady. No. He should be. And for the first time, I saw him smile, not wide, not bold, but quiet and certain. The next crack came when he confronted me directly. You're doing this, he spat one night, pacing the living room like a caged animal. You're turning people against me. I stayed seated, calm, hands folded in my lap. How could I? I've done nothing. Liar. He shouted, his face twisted with rage. I tilted my head. If people are turning against you, maybe it isn't because of me. Maybe it's because of you. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. His breath came fast, his fists clenched, but he couldn't strike me, not anymore. He knew it wouldn't end well if he did. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, and I smiled. The second piece of evidence was stronger, a series of messages, printed and delivered anonymously to just the right hands. No explanations could cover the words written in his own texts, the photos too damning to deny. This time, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were conversations, and he couldn't escape them. At a gathering weeks later, the collapse became undeniable. Surrounded by people he once commanded with charm, he stood trembling, defensive, snapping at innocent remarks. I watched quietly from across the room as his voice grew louder, his words sharper, his smile non-existent, and then it happened, someone confronted him directly. A simple question about the receipts. His face drained of color. His words faltered. His denial sounded hollow, the mask shattered, and everyone saw, the silence in the car that night was thick, suffocating. He gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, his breathing uneven. When we reached home, he turned on me suddenly, his eyes wild. "You're enjoying this?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "Am I?" He stared at me for a long moment, then stormed inside, leaving me standing in the driveway under the night sky. For the first time, I felt the full weight of victory settling on my shoulders. Not complete, not yet, but close. The final piece was devastating: financial records, messages, proof of betrayal in both love and business. I didn't need to spread it far. Just to the right people, and once it landed, the rest spread like wildfire. Calls he once received daily stopped coming. Meetings were cancelled. Invitations disappeared. His world shrank quickly, suffocating him in isolation, and I watched it all, calm, patient, steady. The house, once my cage, became his prison. He stayed inside for days at a time, curtains drawn, phone clutched like a lifeline. His temper burned hotter, his words sharper, but they no longer pierced me. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a cornered animal, pacing, panicking, waiting for a blow he couldn't stop, and I was the one holding it. One night, as I stood at the window watching the rain, he approached me from behind. His voice was low, broken. "What do you want from me?" I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "Nothing." That was the truth. I didn't want his money, his attention, his apologies. I wanted only one thing: for him to know what it felt like to lose everything. And he did. It struck me then, I didn't need to destroy him completely. He had already done that himself. All I had done was remove the mask and let the world see the truth. Revenge wasn't fire or fury. It wasn't blood or violence. It was silence, patience, precision, and it was mine. Control, that word used to belong to him, now it belonged to me. The house was quieter than ever, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. It was freedom. For him, though, it had become a suffocating reminder of everything slipping through his hands. He no longer strutted through the house like a king. He shuffled, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, paranoia clinging to him like a shadow. The phone that once rang with endless calls now sat silent on the counter. The friends who once hung on his every word no longer answered. The colleagues who once admired him avoided his presence. He was a ghost in his own life, and I watched, calm, patient, unshaken. His anger came in bursts now. Unpredictable and wild, he'd slam a glass against the wall for no reason. Shout at the empty air. Accuse me of things I hadn't done, things I hadn't even thought of. "Who are you talking to?" He snapped one night, eyes bloodshot, voice trembling. "No one," I said softly. "Liar." I tilted my head. "If you think I'm lying, then what's the truth?" He froze, breathing hard, unable to answer. The silence stretched until he broke it with a muttered curse, storming out of the room. Each time it happened, I stayed calm. Each time, his fury looked more like fear. One morning, I caught him standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at himself under the same harsh light I had once faced. He didn't see strength. He saw cracks, weakness, the shell of the man he once pretended to be. His shoulders sagged. His eyes were hollow. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "Not such a pretty picture anymore, is it?" He spun around, startled, guilt and rage mixing in his expression. But he didn't speak. He couldn't, because he knew I was right. The evidence I had left untouched, the sharpest, deadliest pieces, still waited. I hadn't needed them yet. But now, it was time. I didn't spread them everywhere. I didn't need to. I placed them carefully in the hands of people who could dismantle the last remnants of his world. Business partners. Associates. People who cared more about reputation than loyalty. And just like that, the final collapse began. Contracts dissolved. Accounts froze. Partnerships ended. His empire, built on arrogance and lies, crumbled overnight. He came to me that night, broken, desperate, his eyes wild with fear. "You did this," he hissed, his voice shaking. I met his gaze calmly. "No. You did this. I just stopped hiding it." His breath came in ragged gasps. He wanted to strike, to scream, to break me the way he once had. But he couldn't. Not anymore. He saw it in my eyes, the strength, the calm, the control he could never touch again, and so he collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. I left him there. In the days that followed, I felt the presence of my quiet rescuer more than ever. Always nearby, always steady, always watching. He never asked for details. Never needed explanations. He simply existed like a wall between me and the storm, a silent acknowledgement that I wasn't alone. And in his eyes, I saw not just protection, but something deeper, a respect, an admiration for the strength I had reclaimed. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something pure, understanding. The man who had once commanded rooms now couldn't command a glance. People crossed the street to avoid him. Friends turned cold. His name, once spoken with admiration, was now whispered with contempt. At home, he wandered like a prisoner, pacing, muttering, avoiding mirrors, avoiding me. He couldn't bear the silence anymore. It reminded him too much of his own downfall, but for me? The silence was freedom. The final step wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. One morning, I packed a single bag. Not hurriedly, not fearfully, but calmly, deliberately. I left it by the door, turned once to look at the house that had been my cage, and smiled. When he stumbled into the room, his eyes red, his shoulders sagging, he froze at the sight of the bag. "You're leaving," he whispered, broken. I met his gaze one last time. "No. I left a long time ago. You just never noticed." And with that, I walked out. The rain was falling softly when I stepped outside, the world fresh, alive, new. A truck idled nearby, familiar, steady, waiting. The window slid down, and those calm eyes met mine. No words were needed. I climbed in, closed the door, and felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. Behind me, the house sat silent. Inside it, a man broken by his own cruelty, trapped in the ruins of the life he had built. Ahead of me, the road stretched wide and endless, and for the first time, it was mine. Freedom didn't come with fireworks, it came with silence. Not the suffocating silence of years spent in his shadow, but the kind that feels like fresh air, like space, like peace. For the first time in longer than I could remember, silence wasn't my enemy. It was mine. As the truck carried me away from the house that had been my cage, I watched the lights disappear in the rearview mirror. There was no sadness. No regret. Just relief. Every mile put distance between me and the life I had left behind. Every turn of the wheels carried me closer to myself. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The man beside me, my rescuer, my silent witness, kept his eyes on the road, giving me space to breathe. He didn't ask where I wanted to go. He didn't need to. Anywhere was better than where I had been. We stopped at a small inn tucked away on the edge of a quiet town. The room was simple, the kind of place no one would think to look for me. When I closed the door behind me, I stood in the middle of the room, staring at the bed, the window, the walls. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I sat down, let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding, and laughed softly to myself. Not a bitter laugh, not a broken one, just light, almost disbelieving. I was free. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror. The harsh bathroom light showed the same face, the same eyes, but something was different. The lines of fear had faded. The tightness around my mouth was gone. My eyes, once dull, now glowed with something I thought I had lost forever, life. I touched the reflection and whispered, "You're back." And this time, I meant it. He didn't hover, didn't press. He was simply there. A steady presence, a quiet strength. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. The silence between us was never heavy. It was comfortable, natural. One afternoon, as we sat outside watching the sun dip low, he finally spoke. "You don't look like someone who escaped. You look like someone who won." I smiled softly. I did. He nodded once, no further words needed. He understood, days turned into weeks. I wandered through towns, exploring streets without fear. I sipped coffee at small cafes, strolled through markets, breathed in the world as if for the first time. No one watched me with suspicion. No one controlled my every move. No one told me what I could or couldn't do. I bought flowers for myself. I lingered in bookstores. I laughed out loud without worrying who heard. Every small act was a victory. Every moment, a reclamation of the life I had been denied. News of him reached me eventually, carried in whispers, in headlines, in casual remarks overheard in cafes. His empire had crumbled completely. Partners gone. Reputation destroyed. He sent letters, at first filled with anger, then with pleading. Apologies scribbled across pages, promises of change, of redemption. I never answered. I read them once, folded them neatly, and left them behind in trash bins or burned them in quiet flames. The man who once demanded all of me now received nothing. The quiet shadow by my side remained. Not intrusive, not demanding, just present. We didn't define what we were. We didn't need to. He had seen me broken and had watched me rebuild. He understood the scars without needing to trace them. One evening, as we sat by a fire, his hand brushed against mine. It wasn't a question, wasn't a claim, it was an offering. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I let my fingers rest against his. Not ownership. Not control. Just connection, and it was enough. For the first time in years, I dreamed, not nightmares of storms and empty highways, but dreams filled with laughter, light, and endless roads stretching forward. I dreamed of a life that wasn't about survival, but about living, and when I woke, I realized it wasn't just a dream anymore. It was real. One morning, I stood at the edge of a quiet lake, the water still, the sky painted in gold. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and let the past slip from my shoulders. I wasn't the broken woman he had tried to create. I wasn't the silent victim he had believed he owned. I wasn't the shadow of myself anymore. I was reborn. Freedom wasn't just an escape, it was a discipline, a daily practice. Every morning I woke up and reminded myself, you are no longer his. And every night, I went to sleep knowing I had survived another day of choosing myself over the shadows of the past. I started small. A rented apartment in a town where no one knew my history, no one whispered my name in connection to his. The walls were bare, the furniture simple, but it was mine. Every detail, every choice, was mine. I painted the kitchen yellow. I bought soft blankets. I filled the space with flowers, fresh ones every week. Things he would have scoffed at as pointless, I embraced with delight. My life no longer had to be practical. It could be beautiful. I took a job at a small cafe on the corner of a cobblestone street. Not glamorous, not powerful, not something he would have approved of, but it was mine. I liked the smell of coffee beans roasting in the morning. I liked greeting strangers, learning their names, watching regulars come and go. I liked earning money that no one else could claim. Each paycheck, no matter how modest, felt like gold in my hands. It was proof of my independence. Proof that I could stand on my own. Of course, the past didn't vanish. Some nights, I still woke in a cold sweat, hearing his voice in my dreams. Sometimes, in crowded streets, I caught myself scanning faces, bracing for him to appear, but he never did. He couldn't. His power had been shattered, his reach cut short. He was nothing more than a ghost now, a fading echo, and each time I faced the fear, breathed through it, and moved forward, I grew stronger. The letters still came, less frequent now. His handwriting was messier, his words more desperate. I've changed. Give me another chance. You'll regret this. I didn't reply. I didn't even open most of them. Eventually, they stopped, and in the silence that followed, I felt the final chord snap. He was still there. Not in every moment, not in every space, but always near. Sometimes he'd stop by the cafe, sitting at the back table, quiet, watchful. Other times we'd walk together after my shift, no destination in mind, just the comfort of company. He never pushed, never asked for more than I was ready to give. One evening, he told me, "You don't need me anymore." I looked at him, steady. Maybe not. But I want you here. And for the first time, a small smile tugged at his lips. It happened one afternoon in the cafe. A customer spilled an entire tray of drinks, and I slipped while trying to help, landing squarely on the floor with whipped cream on my shirt. For a second, the old instinct flared. I braced for anger, for ridicule. But instead, the room erupted in laughter. Not cruel, just light-hearted, contagious. And before I knew it, I was laughing too. It was the first time in years I had laughed without restraint. My cheeks hurt. My stomach ached. And it felt like freedom. One night, I sat at my small kitchen table, a cup of tea warming my hands. I thought about the woman I had been, scared, controlled, silenced. And then I thought about who I was now, free, independent, alive. I whispered into the quiet room, "You did it." For the first time, I believed it. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more cafe shifts, maybe bigger dreams. Maybe love, maybe just companionship, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need certainty. The unknown was no longer a threat, it was a promise, and as I looked out my window at the quiet street below, I knew one thing for sure: I would never go back. The past had lost its hold. The future was mine to shape. Freedom hadn't been handed to me. I had fought for it, clawed through storms and shadows to reach it, and now, it was no longer something fragile. It was solid. Permanent. I was not the woman he had tried to break. I was not the victim he had believed he owned. I was not the silence he demanded. I was my own. Entirely, completely, irrevocably my own. Freedom gave me air, independence gave me roots, but growth, real growth, was like sunlight I had never known before. I was no longer just surviving. I was blooming. The cafe became more than a job. It became a place of belonging. I learned regulars' orders by heart. I shared smiles, small jokes, tiny rituals with strangers who turned into friends. People began to know me, not as someone's wife, not as someone's possession, but simply as me. There was joy in the routine, wiping counters, steaming milk, stacking pastries in glass displays. It was ordinary, but ordinary had become extraordinary to me, and with each day, the weight of the past lifted further. One morning, the cafe owner pulled me aside. "You've got a good way with people," she said. "I've been thinking of stepping back, letting someone else manage the place." Interested? The words stunned me. Me, a manager? Me, trusted, respected, capable? I nodded slowly, a smile tugging at my lips. Yes. I'm interested. It wasn't just a promotion. It was validation. Proof that I wasn't only surviving, I was building something. He noticed the change in me, too. One evening, as we walked along the riverbank, he kept glancing at me, as if seeing me in a new light. "You don't need me anymore," he repeated, his voice low. I looked at him, steady. Need? No. Want? Yes. His eyes softened, just slightly. He didn't argue again. That night, he didn't walk away when his hand brushed mine. This time, he held it. Trust wasn't easy. After years of betrayal, suspicion clung to me like second skin. But he never asked for more than I was ready to give. He didn't demand confessions or force intimacy. He let me set the pace, let me decide what walls to lower and when. The first time I invited him into my apartment, I expected fear to rise. Instead, I felt calm. Safe. He sat at the table, sipping tea I had made, saying nothing, just existing in the space. And I realized, trust doesn't always come with grand declarations. Sometimes it's built in silence. It happened at the cafe after hours. Music drifted from the old radio as I cleaned tables. He walked in, leaning casually against the doorframe, watching me. "You're still here," he said. "Someone has to lock up," I teased. He stepped closer, the music soft and slow. Without a word, he extended a hand. My heart skipped. I hesitated. Dancing had once been something used against me, mocked, controlled. But this wasn't control. This was invitation. I placed my hand in his, and we moved slowly between the empty tables. No audience. No judgment. Just two people, swaying in the quiet. And for the first time, I felt what it was like to be held without being owned. Of course, ghosts don't vanish entirely. One day, as I left the cafe, I saw someone watching from across the street. For a moment, my chest tightened, panic clawing its way up, but when I blinked, the figure was gone. Just a stranger passing by, the fear lingered, but it didn't consume me. Instead, I squared my shoulders and walked on. He no longer controlled me. Even his shadow had lost its power. A final letter arrived weeks later. Short, bitter, angry, "You'll regret leaving. No one else will love you." I read it once, smiled, and tore it into pieces, because I knew the truth: love wasn't something I had to beg for. It wasn't something to be bought, demanded, or controlled. It was something freely given, and I had already begun to find it, first in myself, and slowly, cautiously, in him. Spring came, and I planted flowers on my balcony. Bright colors, fragile petals, things that once would have been dismissed as wasteful. Every morning, I watered them, watching them reach toward the sun. They were proof, in their quiet way, that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about growing despite it. Just like me, one evening, I caught my reflection again, this time in the cafe's front window. I stopped, staring. The woman I saw was strong, smiling, alive. Her shoulders no longer hunched. Her eyes no longer darted in fear. She stood tall, steady, certain, and I realized I had become someone even stronger than I ever imagined. I wasn't just free, I wasn't just surviving. I was blooming, and nothing, no ghost, no letter, no shadow, could ever take that away again. Freedom had given me breath, healing had given me strength, but closure, that was the final step, not for him. For me, it arrived one spring afternoon, tucked inside a plain white envelope slipped beneath my cafe door, a summons. Not legal, not formal. Just words scratched on cheap paper: "Meet me. One last time. If you have any mercy left." I stared at it, my chest tight. Part of me wanted to tear it up, pretend it never existed. Another part, the part that had clawed her way through storms and silence, knew this was the last thread I had to cut. I folded the paper neatly, placed it in my pocket, and made my choice. It was in a park, on a bench beneath a tree that had shed half its leaves. He looked smaller now, hunched, clothes hanging loose, eyes dull. The man who once commanded rooms now couldn't even command his own posture. When he saw me, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You came." "I did," I said evenly. "You ruined me." His voice cracked, somewhere between accusation and plea. "No," I replied softly. "You ruined yourself. I just stopped hiding it." He shook his head, muttering excuses, apologies, promises. The same tired cycle, and I listened, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to hear the weakness in his words, to remind myself of the truth. He no longer had power over me. When he finally fell silent, I stood. "This is the last time you'll ever see me," I said. "And the last time I'll ever think of you." His mouth opened, but no words came. I walked away. As I left the park, a strange lightness filled me. Not joy, not triumph, something deeper, finality. He was no longer a ghost hovering at the edges of my life. He was just a man, broken and small, fading into irrelevance, and with that, the circle closed. When I reached my apartment, I found him, the quiet protector, the steady presence, waiting on the steps. He didn't ask where I'd been. He just looked at me, searching my face, reading the calm in my expression. "It's done," I said simply. He nodded, and that was enough. That night, I invited friends from the cafe, neighbors from my building, the small circle of people who had become my chosen family. We crowded into my little apartment, eating, laughing, filling the space with warmth. At one point, as I stood in the doorway watching them, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't isolated anymore. I wasn't silenced. I wasn't afraid. I was surrounded by life. By connection. By freedom, and for the first time in years, I let myself dance, not carefully, not cautiously, but with abandon. Later, when the laughter had quieted and the night had grown still, he stayed behind. We sat on the balcony, the stars scattered across the sky. "I don't want to just be your shadow anymore," he said softly. I turned to him, heart steady, mind clear. You never were, I said. You were my light when I couldn't see my own. His hand brushed mine, not tentative this time, but sure, and I didn't pull away, because I was ready. The next morning, I stood once again in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken, wasn't afraid, wasn't waiting for permission to live. She was strong. Free. Whole, and for the first time I saw not just survival, not just healing, but joy. The kind of joy that comes from knowing you've walked through fire and emerged not burned, but reborn. The past no longer defined me. The scars didn't bind me. The storm had ended, the silence had lifted, and the road ahead stretched wide and open. I wasn't his, I wasn't broken, I wasn't alone, I was mine. Entirely, irrevocably mine, and the circle, once a prison, was now complete.